I once worked as a direct care aide for a 65-year-old woman named Martha, and when I say once, I mean I literally worked for her for one single night. You're about to find out why. Her daughter, Colleen, hired me to watch Martha overnight while she worked. At the time, I had plenty of experience with developmental disabilities, but nothing could have prepared me for that shift. Colleen left for work around 9 p.m. She'd warned me that Martha's dementia sometimes made her walk around the house at night, confused, and that I just need to calm her down and let her back to bed. Easy enough. For the first hour, it was quiet. I was just watching TV when I heard footsteps upstairs. I called Martha's name, but she didn't answer. The footsteps just went back to her room, and the door closed. About an hour later, I went to the kitchen to grab a sandwich. As I walked back to the couch, I nearly had a heart attack. Martha was standing silently in the doorway to the living room, just watching me. I was so startled I dropped my plate, and it shattered everywhere. "Who are you?" she started yelling, her voice a piercing scream. I tried to remind her that Colleen had hired me, that we'd met just a few hours ago. She just kept screaming, "Why are you here? I don't know you." It took a while, but I finally managed to calm her down enough to let her back upstairs. I gave her a glass of water, some melatonin, and her prescribed anti-anxiety medication before heading back down. A few hours later, I was exhausted. Colleen had told me I could use the spare bedroom upstairs if I needed to rest. Believing the medication had knocked Martha out for the night, I went up and fell asleep within minutes. I was out for maybe an hour when a sound from downstairs jolted me awake. It was a repeated, violent slamming. Every second or two, I jumped out of bed and crept to the top of the stairs. The sound was coming from the kitchen. As I quietly made my way down, I peered around the corner, and what I saw was like a scene straight out of a horror movie. In the pitch-black kitchen, all I could see was Martha's silhouette in front of the oven. She was just standing there, yanking the oven door open and slamming it shut over and over again. "Martha," I said, my voice loud and sharp. She stopped, turned her head slowly toward me, slammed the oven door one last time, and started walking right for me. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice now shaking. She got close enough that I could see her face in the dim light. Her expression was completely blank. She walked right past me without a word and went up the stairs. When she got to her room, she slammed the door shut. I quietly opened it a crack to check on her and found her standing by her bed, just facing the wall. It was one of the most unsettling things I'd ever seen. I gently guided her back into bed and said goodnight, hoping it would be the last time. I was wrong. I woke up again sometime later. The room was still pitch black. I didn't know what woke me until I heard a sound from inside the closet. I looked over and saw the closet door was cracked open. In the gap, I could see the black shadow of a head peeking out at me. My heart almost stopped. "Martha," I whispered. No answer. She pushed the door open and started walking slowly toward my bed, repeating what she'd said hours ago. "Who are you? I don't know you." As she got closer, I fumbled for the lamp on the nightstand. When the light finally flickered on, I saw it. Martha was holding a huge kitchen knife. In that instant, everything changed. She wasn't my patient anymore. She was a threat. "Martha, put the knife down," I screamed. My yelling just made her more agitated. She got closer, screaming back, "I don't know you." I wasn't about to try and reason with a dementia patient holding a knife. I mapped a path around her, jumped off the far side of the bed, and sprinted for the door as I ran past. She swung the knife through the air. It was a slow, weak swipe, but it showed she meant to use it. I got downstairs, grabbed my shoes, and ran outside. Instead of 911, I called Colleen, just like she'd asked me to do in an emergency. She started yelling at me not to leave her mother alone. She tried to kill me. I yelled back. When Colleen finally got home, she found Martha back in her own bed, fast asleep. She actually accused me of exaggerating the whole thing. right up until she found the kitchen knife lying on the floor next to her mother's bed. I never set foot in that house again. It was my first day working for this new plumbing company. The owner, Dave, was one of those old school guys who seemed to enjoy hazing the new blood. So, of course, for my very first job, I wasn't sent to a nice suburban house with a simple clog. No, I was sent to some undesirable job far out of town, in a part of the county where the roads turned to gravel and the houses looked like they were one stiff breeze away from collapsing. I don't see it as a coincidence. The call was for a leaky pipe under a kitchen sink, which is typically the easiest, most basic job you can get. A real softball for a first day. I pulled up to the address, my first ever call for the company, and the place was an absolute wreck. It was a completely rundown, two-story house with peeling paint that looked like sunburnt skin, and a yard of weeds so high they were swallowing the porch. It looked like no one had lived there for years, let alone had running water to leak. I went up to the house and knocked on the splintered wood of the front door. After a long moment, it creaked open, and a middle-aged man stood there. I didn't like his aura from the start. He had this unflattering, disproportionately wide smile plastered on his face. A grin so broad it didn't look human. It made his entire face appear off-putting, like one of those creepy porcelain dolls. His voice, when he spoke, was the opposite of what I expected. It was really soft and high-pitched, almost like a child's. Come in, he said. He welcomed me inside the house, and the interior was even stranger than the exterior. It was completely empty. Not a single piece of furniture in the cavernous living room. Just dust motes dancing in the slivers of light coming through the grimy windows. My footsteps echoed on the bare floorboards. Just moved in? I asked, trying to make sense of it. He replied, yes, and then let out this weird, high-pitched little giggle that did nothing to put me at ease. He brought me to the kitchen. The first thing I did was set my toolbox down on the cracked linoleum counter, the sound echoing in the empty space. I opened the cabinets under the sink and prepared to slide myself in to get a look. As I was getting situated, I noticed the man was standing directly over me. His legs spread wide so that I was sandwiched right between both of his worn-out boots. It was extremely uncomfortable and felt aggressive, like he was penning me in. I politely asked him to give me some space, and he backed up a bit, but not enough that would make me feel comfortable. He was still hovering. That's when I realized that I couldn't find the source of the leak because there wasn't a single drop of water, not even condensation, on any of the pipes. They were bone dry. I got out from under the sink and tried the faucet. Nothing. Not even a hiss of air. I looked at the weird man, who was still smiling, that impossibly wide smile, and asked him why the water wasn't running. He said, "Oh, I must have shut off the main water valve without realizing it." When I say I stood there speechless for a few seconds, I am not exaggerating. I just stared at him. Who calls a plumber to fix a leaky pipe when they know the main water supply is turned off? How do you do something like that by mistake? I asked him bluntly, my patience gone. He just smiled and shrugged his bony shoulders. I told him to go turn the water valve back on so I could do my job. He turned and said, "He'll be right back," and I saw him leave the kitchen. But then I heard his footsteps on the stairs, and they were going up. My blood ran cold. In my entire life, I have never seen or heard of a main water valve being upstairs in any house. They're always in the basement or on the ground floor. I knew in that instant that something was terribly wrong with this guy and this whole situation. And then I heard a sound of multiple sets of footsteps from upstairs, now coming down the steps, quickly, like a stampede. In that split second, my survival instinct took over. I decided I was out of there. I grabbed my tools and quickly walked out to the front door and to my van. I am a pretty large and loud dude, so I am not really intimidated very easily. But there was something about that situation, and that guy that told me that some real shit was about to go down. I looked back at the house for a second, then got in my van and peeled out of there. I called Dave, my boss, letting him know it was just some kind of prank call, because that sounded better than me saying I was scared out of my mind by some creepy guy in an abandoned house. Later, I did a few minutes of investigating and found out that's exactly what it was, a vacant, abandoned property. I got the number that made the call from Dave, and it turned out to be a voice-over IP number, not even a real phone. I reported the shady encounter to the local police, just so they would be aware of it. I only worked for that specific plumbing company for about a year, and I never ever went back to that sketchy part of town again. My first night working for Domino's was also my last. It was back in 2019, and I was just trying to scrape together some money for college supplies in my dorm room. Since it was my first night, I was being trained, which meant my manager had to ride along with me on my first few deliveries to evaluate me. It was getting late, around 8 o'clock on a dark night, when we got an order. Our store was still old school. There was no big electronic TV showing a map. We had to look up the addresses on our phones. The order was for 4 large pizzas and 2 big bottles of soda, and the address was way out of the way, on some long, winding road in the middle of nowhere. My town was old, so it wasn't completely unheard of to have these isolated houses, but this one was far, since it was my car being used for the evaluation. It was me, my manager, and another trainee who I didn't know crammed into my little sedan. The drive took a good 20 minutes. The street lights of town quickly disappearing in my rearview mirror until we were surrounded by nothing but dark woods. The mood in the car shifted from casual training chatter to an uneasy silence as we got deeper into the country. The house, when we finally found it, looked like something from a horror movie. It was an old, 2-story home, completely run down and barely standing. The wood on the outside was dark with rot and chipping away, and some of the windows were covered with old, gray boards. It did not look like a house you'd expect people to be living in, let alone ordering nearly $50 worth of pizza from. I remember turning to my manager and asking if we really had to go up there. He told both of us yes, but that he'd come with us to the door. I hesitantly got out of the car, and the other trainee looked just as nervous as I felt. As we started making our way up the cracked, weed-choked walkway, the other guy grabbed my arm. "Dude," he whispered, "I think I saw someone watching us from that window upstairs. The one without the boards." Our manager overheard him and just told him he was being paranoid, and that this shouldn't take more than a minute. The air around the house was thick with the smell of something rotten, a sweet, sick smell that made my stomach churn. I don't know how I had the courage to ring the bell, but I did. Of course, it didn't work. The sound was dead. So my manager pounded on the door, the noise echoing flatly. No answer. We waited for what felt like an eternity. Then he knocked again, harder this time, still nothing. We were all getting impatient and creeped out. Finally, after about a full minute of waiting, we heard locks turning and the door opened, but only a crack. A sliver of a man's face, shrouded in shadow, peered out. "Who are you? What do you want?" he asked, his voice low and suspicious. My manager, trying to sound cheerful, said we had their pizza delivery. The man's entire demeanor changed in an instant. He quickly unlocked the rest of the locks and swung the door open, acting all friendly and jovial towards us. The sudden switch was jarring and it freaked the 3 of us out. He was an older gentleman, at least in his 50s, and he gave us some lame excuse about it taking him a while to get to the door because it was hard for him to get around. He told us he'd be right back with the money, and he left the front door wide open. I took the opportunity to look inside, and my blood ran cold. The house was a shell. It was completely empty. There was no furniture, no pictures, no rugs, nothing but the bare, dusty floorboards and a couple of dirty blankets piled in a corner. This guy was obviously homeless and just squatting here. That's when we heard footsteps coming from upstairs. It was definitely more than one person. The realization hit us. The other trainee was right. Someone had been watching us, my manager. His voice, now tight with tension, yelled out if the man had the money yet. He never got a response back. The footsteps upstairs stopped. Everything just stopped. The house became unnervingly silent, and I could hear the three of us breathing heavily in the rotten air. My manager told us to stay put at the front door in case the man came back, and that he'd go around the house to see if the guy needed help or something. We just nodded as he walked off the porch and disappeared around the side of the house. The other trainee and I stood there in terrified silence. Then we heard a new sound, but not from upstairs. It was a faint shuffling, a scraping sound, and it was coming from below us, from under the porch or a cellar. We both looked at each other, completely puzzled and on the verge of bolting. That's when our manager screamed. It wasn't a yell, it was a raw, strangled scream of pure terror. We then heard frantic running, and he came sprinting from the back of the house, his face pale. "Get in the car," he yelled, his voice cracking. "We're leaving now." I have never driven a car faster in my life. As we sped away, my manager, panting and shaking, explained what he saw when he was walking around to the back. He saw a group of people in the darkness, surrounding a sort of makeshift campfire. He got closer to them, thinking they were just other squatters. And then he saw what was in the middle of their circle. It was a baby deer. The group of men were just sitting around it, laughing quietly as if they found its terror funny. My heart almost stopped. The new guy and I quit the second we got back to the store. I heard the manager quit about a month after this. We had obviously walked into some kind of twisted, sick cult meeting, and to this day, I am just glad we left when we did. I never worked another delivery job again.